If you've clicked on this audiobook out of curiosity or because something about the title caught your attention, you've been probably searching for answers you couldn't quite put into words. Whatever brought you here, you're about to hear is not simply a collection of ancient teachings. For nearly 2,000 years, the Emerald Tablet has challenged philosophers, mystics, and seekers with one extraordinary idea: that reality is not as random as it appears. Beneath every coincidence, every challenge, and every turning point, there are timeless laws quietly shaping our experience. This audiobook is about discovering those laws, not by asking you to believe anything blindly, but by helping you recognize patterns that may have been present all along. And once you begin to see them, you may never experience your own life in quite the same way again. The Laws of the Emerald Tablet. Introduction. You have probably heard fragments of its wisdom before without realizing where they came from. As above, so below. Everything is vibration. The universe is mental. These ideas have echoed through countless books, philosophies, and spiritual movements, yet almost no one explains the complete system they belong to. They are often presented as isolated quotes, stripped of the deeper framework that gives them their true power. Without that framework, they remain inspiring ideas. With it, they become practical laws capable of changing the way you understand yourself and the world around you. This audiobook reveals those forgotten laws, not as abstract philosophy, not as religious doctrine, not as superstition, but as a complete map for understanding why life unfolds the way it does, why certain patterns repeat, why your inner world continuously shapes your outer experience, and why every challenge, opportunity, and transformation follows principles that have remained unchanged for thousands of years. The Emerald Tablet was never meant to predict your future. It was meant to teach you how reality itself operates. It explains why your thoughts alone are never enough, why forcing outcomes often creates resistance, why periods of uncertainty are often necessary for growth, and why what appears to be coincidence is frequently the visible expression of invisible laws already in motion. Whether these teachings are understood as timeless spiritual truths, profound philosophical insights, or symbolic descriptions of the human experience is ultimately for you to decide. What matters is that generation after generation returned to this mysterious text because they believed it contained something enduring, principles that seem to explain both the universe around us and the unseen patterns within us. As you continue listening, do not think of these chapters as information to memorize. Think of them as lenses through which to observe your own life. You may begin to notice patterns you have overlooked for years. You may recognize that what once appeared random now follows an elegant order. You may even discover that many of the questions you have carried about purpose, relationships, success, failure, and transformation have always pointed toward the same hidden foundation. Because the greatest secret of the Emerald Tablet is not that it contains mysterious knowledge. It is that these laws have been shaping your life from the very beginning, whether you knew they existed or not. The only question is whether you are ready to see them. Chapter 1. Reality is more alive than you think. If every major event in your life had followed invisible laws from the very beginning, would you even know it? Most people would answer no, not because they reject the possibility, but because life rarely presents itself as an orderly sequence of causes and effects. Instead, it arrives as a collection of moments that seem disconnected from one another. A chance meeting changes the course of a career. A brief conversation alters a relationship forever. One decision made in frustration echoes across decades, while another made almost absent-mindedly opens a door that could never have been predicted. Looking backward, patterns sometimes appear. Looking forward, everything feels uncertain. This uncertainty has led human beings to create many explanations for the unfolding of life. Some call it luck, others call it coincidence. Some attribute it to destiny, while others believe everything is determined by random probability unfolding across an indifferent universe. Every civilization has searched for an answer because every human being eventually arrives at the same question. Is there truly an order behind my life? Or am I simply trying to find patterns where none exist? Thousands of years ago, long before telescopes explored distant galaxies or microscopes revealed invisible worlds hidden within a single drop of water, the priests and initiates of ancient Egypt asked precisely the same question. They observed the stars returning to their appointed places with astonishing precision. They watched the Nile flood according to rhythms that sustained an entire civilization. They saw the changing seasons, the migration of birds, the cycles of birth and death, and concluded that nature behaved less like a series of accidents and more like a magnificent composition whose movements followed principles that rarely failed. To them, order was not merely convenient. Order was sacred. The Egyptians expressed this idea through a principle they called ma'at. Although often translated as truth, balance, or justice, none of these words fully capture its meaning. Ma'at represented the invisible harmony that allowed the universe itself to continue existing. The stars moved because of it. Kingdoms flourished when they aligned with it. Individuals found peace when their lives reflected it. Chaos was not simply disorder. Chaos was the forgetting of that harmony. This ancient understanding raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if many of the struggles we experience are not signs that life is broken, but signs that we have lost sight of the deeper order beneath it? Modern society teaches us to focus almost entirely on visible causes. We measure income, productivity, education, physical health, and external achievement. These things matter. They shape our daily experience in meaningful ways. Yet beneath every visible action lies something far less obvious: perception. Two people can live through the same event and emerge with entirely different lives. Two siblings raised in the same home may carry opposite beliefs about themselves into adulthood. One remembers encouragement, the other remembers criticism. One develops confidence, the other becomes convinced they must constantly prove their worth. The house was the same. The parents were the same. The meals, holidays, and family photographs were shared. Yet the invisible interpretations quietly written inside each mind became the foundation for two completely different realities. This is one of the first clues that reality is more mysterious than it appears. Events alone do not determine the direction of a life. Something within us participates in their meaning. Centuries later, philosophers in Greece would arrive at a remarkably similar conclusion. Plato argued that human beings often mistake appearances for reality itself. His famous allegory of the cave describes prisoners who spend their entire lives watching shadows cast upon a wall. Having never seen the world outside, they naturally assume the shadows are reality. Only when one prisoner escapes does he discover that everything he once believed to be true was merely a reflection of something far greater. Although Plato never claimed to be interpreting the Emerald Tablet directly, the parallel is striking. Both traditions suggest that ordinary perception reveals only the surface of existence. Beneath visible events lies a deeper structure waiting to be recognized. The Emerald Tablet belongs to this tradition of hidden structure. Despite inspiring countless philosophers, alchemists, mystics, physicians, and seekers over the centuries, The text itself is astonishingly brief. Depending on the translation, it occupies little more than a single page. Yet from these few enigmatic lines emerged entire schools of thought devoted to understanding the hidden architecture of existence. How could such a short text influence civilizations for centuries? The answer is surprisingly simple. Because great wisdom rarely depends upon the number of words. A seed contains almost no weight compared to the tree that eventually grows from it. Yet without the seed, the forest never exists. The Emerald Tablet became such a seed. Generation after generation returned to it, not because it answered every question, but because it seemed to contain principles capable of explaining questions people had not yet learned to ask. Its influence spread across Egypt, Greece, the Islamic world, medieval Europe, and eventually into the foundations of Renaissance philosophy. Alchemists studied it while searching for the legendary philosopher's stone. Mystics contemplated its symbols in silence. Scholars debated its origins. Even today, historians continue to argue over when it was written, who first recorded it, and whether Hermes Trismegistus was a historical teacher, a symbolic figure, or the fusion of several ancient traditions into a single legendary sage. Curiously, none of those debates change the value of the ideas themselves. Whether Hermes was one man or many, whether the tablet was carved in emerald or survives only through later translations, whether parts of the story became myth through centuries of retelling, all of these questions belong to history. The greater question belongs to you. Do the principles described within it still explain something about the world we inhabit today? That question cannot be answered by archaeology. It can only be answered through observation. This is precisely what separates the Hermetic tradition from blind belief. It does not ask you to accept its teachings because they are ancient. It asks you to watch your own life carefully enough to discover whether the patterns it describes are already unfolding around you. In that sense, the Emerald Tablet resembles less a sacred commandment and more a map. A map has no power until someone begins walking the landscape it describes. The remaining chapters of this book are not asking you to adopt a new religion or replace your existing beliefs. They invite you to become an observer, to notice recurring patterns, to pay attention to relationships that repeat the same emotional lessons, to question why certain opportunities appear effortlessly while others resist every attempt to force them, to wonder whether what you have always called coincidence might sometimes be the visible expression of deeper causes quietly operating beneath the surface. If those causes exist, then understanding them may be one of the most important journeys a person can undertake. Because the moment life is seen as lawful rather than random, something extraordinary begins to happen. Confusion slowly gives way to curiosity. Fear begins yielding to understanding, and what once felt like an unpredictable universe starts revealing itself as something far more intimate than we ever imagined. The invitation to observe may sound deceptively simple, but it is perhaps the most demanding practice the ancient Hermetic philosophers ever proposed. Human beings are remarkably skilled at observing everything except the assumptions through which they observe. We notice the behavior of other people long before we notice the beliefs quietly shaping our own interpretations. We become experts in identifying external causes while remaining strangers to the invisible habits of thought that accompany us into every conversation, every decision, and every challenge we face. Consider how naturally the mind searches for immediate explanations. If a business succeeds, we point to timing, strategy, or talent. If it fails, we blame the economy, poor leadership, or unfortunate circumstances. If a relationship flourishes, we credit compatibility. If it falls apart, we often assign responsibility to personality or fate. Rarely do we pause to ask whether these visible events may have emerged from countless invisible causes interacting over months or even years before finally becoming visible. Nature never behaves this way. A mighty oak tree does not appear on the morning it breaks through the surface of the soil. Long before anyone sees the first green shoot, an intricate process has already been unfolding beneath the ground. The seed absorbs moisture. Its outer shell begins to soften. Tiny roots push silently into the earth, searching for stability before a single leaf ever reaches toward the light. To anyone watching only the surface, nothing appears to be happening. Yet beneath the soil, life has already committed itself to a direction. Human experience often unfolds in much the same way. What we call an event is frequently only the visible moment when an invisible process finally reaches the surface. The Hermetic philosophers believed that almost everything in life follows this pattern. Success appears gradual only when viewed from within the process. Looking backward, it often seems sudden. A musician spends 20 years practicing scales before the world calls them an overnight success. A scientist devotes decades to quiet research before one discovery changes an entire field. A marriage that appears stable from the outside may have been strengthened through thousands of unnoticed acts of patience, forgiveness, and understanding long before anyone else recognized its strength. Likewise, collapse rarely arrives without warning. A bridge does not fail because of the final vehicle that crosses it. It fails because countless invisible stresses have accumulated over time until one additional weight simply reveals what was already true. The final moment attracts all the attention, while the deeper causes remain hidden beneath the surface. This way of seeing the world changes everything. Instead of asking why something happened today, the Hermetic tradition encourages us to ask what invisible process has been quietly unfolding for much longer than we realized. That question alone transforms frustration into curiosity. Rather than becoming trapped by appearances, we begin searching for origins. The ancient Egyptians were masters of this kind of observation. Their civilization endured for thousands of years not merely because of military strength or political organization, but because they believed survival depended upon understanding recurring patterns. They watched the heavens with extraordinary care. The annual flooding of the Nile was not viewed as an unpredictable miracle, but as part of a dependable rhythm woven into the fabric of creation itself. Architecture, agriculture, medicine, and even spiritual practice were designed around the conviction that life flourishes when it aligns with enduring principles rather than temporary impulses. It is no coincidence that many of the world's oldest civilizations developed sophisticated systems of observation long before they possessed advanced technology. Observation itself was considered a sacred discipline. To observe carefully was to participate in wisdom. Modern life has made observation surprisingly difficult. Our attention is constantly pulled toward what is immediate. Notifications compete for our awareness. News cycles compress months of events into hours. Opinions are formed within seconds and forgotten by the following week. We have become extraordinarily informed about what is happening while becoming increasingly disconnected from why it is happening. The Emerald Tablet quietly resists this way of living. Its teachings ask us to slow down, not because truth moves slowly, but because perception often does. There are certain patterns that reveal themselves only to a patient observer. Think of standing beside the ocean. If you watch the waves for only a few seconds, they appear random. Some are larger than others. Some arrive unexpectedly. Some break gently while others crash with tremendous force. But remain on the shore long enough and another reality begins to emerge. Beneath the apparent unpredictability exists rhythm. Tides advance and retreat. The moon exerts its silent influence across unimaginable distances. Forces too vast to see directly reveal themselves through patterns anyone can witness with sufficient patience. The Hermetic philosophers believed human life possesses similar tides. Periods of expansion are followed by periods of reflection. Moments of certainty often give way to seasons of questioning. Growth alternates with rest. Achievement alternates with preparation. To resist these movements is to exhaust ourselves, fighting rhythms that existed long before we were born. To recognize them is to cooperate with something far greater than individual effort alone. This does not diminish the importance of personal responsibility. On the contrary, it deepens it. Once we recognize that life unfolds through principles rather than accidents, our choices become even more meaningful. Every decision contributes to patterns that may continue unfolding long after the moment itself has passed. Every habit quietly shapes future character. Every repeated thought gradually influences the lens through which we experience the world. Perhaps this explains why so many ancient traditions placed such extraordinary emphasis on self-mastery. They understood that the greatest battles are rarely fought against the world. They are fought within perception itself. Before a civilization can fall, confusion enters the mind. Before a relationship breaks apart, understanding quietly disappears. Before a dream is abandoned, hope slowly erodes through countless, unnoticed compromises. The visible event is almost never the true beginning. It is simply the moment when the invisible finally becomes impossible to ignore. For centuries, students entering the mystery schools of Egypt were not immediately taught secret doctrines or hidden symbols. They were first taught to observe, to listen, to remain silent long enough for the patterns beneath ordinary experience to become visible. Their teachers understood something that modern education often overlooks. Knowledge can be given, understanding cannot. Understanding must be discovered through direct experience. That is why the Emerald Tablet has survived for so many centuries. It refuses to offer easy answers. Instead, it changes the questions. And the quality of the questions we ask ultimately determines the quality of the lives we are capable of living. There is another reason the teachings of the Emerald Tablet have endured while countless other philosophies have faded into history. They begin with an observation so ordinary that most people overlook it entirely. Everything in nature follows laws. The sun does not decide whether it feels like rising. The seasons do not argue among themselves over whose turn it is to arrive. Rivers do not pause to question whether they should continue flowing toward the sea. Even the smallest seed carries within it an astonishing intelligence. Place an acorn into fertile soil, and given enough time, it never becomes a rose. It never becomes wheat. Hidden within something no larger than your thumb is an invisible pattern directing every stage of its growth. No one calls this miraculous because it is familiar, yet familiarity has a strange way of hiding wonder. The Hermetic philosophers believed the same invisible order that guides the stars, the oceans, and the forests also operates within human life. We often imagine ourselves standing apart from nature, as though the laws governing the rest of existence somehow stop at the edge of human consciousness. But the Emerald Tablet proposes the opposite. It suggests that human beings are not exceptions to universal law. We are expressions of it. This idea has profound consequences. If it is true, then our thoughts are not isolated events occurring inside a private mind. Our emotions are not meaningless chemical accidents. Our choices are not disconnected from the larger fabric of existence. Every aspect of human life participates in an order that extends far beyond the limits of individual awareness. That is a difficult thought to accept because it requires humility. Modern culture celebrates control. We are encouraged to believe that determination alone can overcome every obstacle, that success belongs exclusively to those who work the hardest, think the fastest, or want something badly enough. Effort certainly matters. Discipline matters. Knowledge matters. But the ancient sages consistently warned that effort without understanding often becomes struggle. Imagine trying to sail across the ocean. Two captains possess identical ships. They carry the same supplies. They have equal experience. They leave the harbor on the same morning. The first captain studies the tides, the winds, and the stars before raising the sails. The second ignores them completely. He is convinced that determination alone will carry him to his destination. Whenever the wind shifts against him, he pulls harder on the ropes. When the current pushes him away from shore, he blames the sea. When storms arrive, he curses the sky. Both captains are working equally hard. Only one understands the laws governing the journey. The difference between them is not effort, it is alignment. This simple distinction appears again and again throughout the wisdom traditions of the world. The greatest masters were rarely described as people who forced reality into submission. More often, they were described as individuals who learned to cooperate with principles already woven into existence. They understood that wisdom consists less in controlling life than in recognizing how life naturally moves. This insight has quietly influenced some of history's greatest thinkers. The Stoic philosophers taught that peace comes from aligning ourselves with the rational order of nature, rather than demanding that reality obey our preferences. Taoist sages spoke of moving with the current instead of endlessly swimming against it. Buddhist teachers observed that suffering often increases when we resist the changing nature of existence itself. Although these traditions developed independently, they point toward a remarkably similar conclusion. Reality possesses an order that rewards cooperation more readily than resistance. The Emerald Tablet belongs within this family of ideas, yet it carries them one step further. It suggests that these patterns are not merely philosophical observations, they are laws. Laws function whether we acknowledge them or not. A child touching a flame does not first need to understand combustion before experiencing its consequences. Likewise, a person may spend an entire lifetime unaware of the principles described by the Hermetic philosophers while still living within their influence every single day. Perhaps this explains one of the most frustrating experiences common to nearly every human being. Have you ever noticed that two people can receive exactly the same advice and achieve completely different results? One reads a book about confidence and gradually transforms their life. Another reads the very same pages and remains exactly where they began. One attends a seminar feeling inspired and months later has built entirely new habits. Another leaves equally motivated, only to fall back into familiar patterns within days. Information alone cannot explain the difference. The Hermetic philosophers would argue that knowledge becomes powerful only when it harmonizes with deeper laws already operating beneath conscious awareness. Reading about courage is not the same as becoming courageous. Memorizing wisdom is not the same as living wisely. A map can describe every mountain in exquisite detail, but no one reaches the summit without taking the journey itself. For this reason, the ancient mystery schools placed remarkably little emphasis on collecting information. Instead, they emphasized transformation. The student was expected to become different, not simply know more. This may be one of the greatest misunderstandings surrounding the Emerald Tablet today. Many approach it hoping to uncover hidden secrets, capable of changing external circumstances. Better finances, better relationships, better opportunities, better health. While the Hermetic tradition never dismisses these aspirations, it insists they emerge as consequences rather than starting points. Transformation begins elsewhere. It begins with perception. Every civilization leaves behind monuments. Some build pyramids, others build temples. Some leave libraries filled with books. Yet perhaps the greatest monument any civilization can leave is a way of seeing the world. The Emerald Tablet is precisely that. It is not merely a collection of statements preserved across centuries. It is an invitation to adopt an entirely different relationship with reality, one in which every encounter becomes meaningful, every difficulty becomes instructive, every success becomes understandable, every apparent coincidence becomes worthy of careful attention. Imagine living one ordinary week while holding this possibility in mind. A stranger offers exactly the encouragement you needed to hear. An unexpected delay prevents you from making a decision you later discover would have harmed you. A disagreement reveals an insecurity you had never recognized. A closed door quietly redirects you toward an opportunity that had previously escaped your attention. Most people would experience these moments independently. The Hermetic philosopher begins asking whether they belong to the same conversation, not a conversation spoken with words, a conversation conducted through experience itself. This is why the Emerald Tablet has fascinated seekers for nearly 2,000 years. It does not ask whether life contains meaning. It asks whether we have learned to recognize the language through which that meaning is expressed. The chapters that follow will explore those laws one by one. Some will challenge assumptions you may have carried for years. Others may seem strangely familiar, as though you have always sensed them without possessing the words to describe them. That feeling should not surprise you. Truth often feels less like discovering something entirely new than remembering something quietly forgotten. Before we can understand how reality reflects the inner world, before we can understand vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, or the hidden process the alchemists called transformation, we must first accept the possibility that the universe is not silent. It has been teaching us from the very beginning. The question has never been whether the lessons were present. The question has always been whether we were paying attention. Chapter 2. The Law of Reflection. There is a curious habit shared by almost every human being. When something goes wrong, our attention immediately turns outward. We search for someone to blame: a difficult employer, an unfaithful partner, an unreliable economy, poor timing, bad luck, circumstances, society, the government, our childhood, our parents. The list is endless, and to be fair, many of these forces genuinely influence the course of our lives. The Hermetic philosophers never denied that the external world possesses tremendous power. Storms destroy homes. Illness interrupts carefully made plans. Wars reshape entire generations. To pretend that every event exists solely because we imagined it would be both dishonest and deeply unkind. Yet the Emerald Tablet asks a question that is far more subtle than assigning blame. It asks whether the world outside us may be constantly revealing something about the world within us. This is not the same as saying we create every event. It is saying we participate in every experience. There is an important difference. Imagine walking into a room lined entirely with mirrors. At first, you hardly notice them. You are focused on your destination, your thoughts occupied with the concerns of the day. But then you catch sight of your reflection from dozens of different angles. Every movement you make is instantly echoed. Raise your hand, and every mirror raises its hand. Turn your head, and the room turns with you. Smile, and the reflections smile back. Now imagine becoming angry with the mirrors. Imagine spending hours trying to force each reflection to change while refusing to move yourself. The effort would be exhausting, yet this is remarkably similar to the way many people spend their lives. We attempt to change reflections while leaving their source untouched. The Hermetic sages believed this misunderstanding lies at the heart of much unnecessary suffering. long before modern psychology introduced concepts such as projection, unconscious bias, or cognitive filters. The ancient mystery schools observed that human beings rarely experience reality directly. We experience reality through ourselves. Every event passes through memory. Every conversation passes through expectation. Every opportunity passes through belief. Every relationship passes through the stories we quietly carry about who we are and what we deserve. By the time reality reaches conscious awareness, it has already been interpreted. Most of those interpretations happen so quickly that we mistake them for objective truth. Consider a simple example. A manager calls two employees into separate meetings and gives each identical feedback. "You've done good work," the manager says, "but there are several areas where I think you can improve." The first employee leaves feeling energized. "Someone believes in me enough to help me grow." They spend the following months improving their skills, asking better questions, and gradually becoming indispensable to the company. The second employee walks out convinced they are about to lose their job. Every future conversation becomes filled with anxiety. They hesitate to contribute new ideas, avoid responsibility, and slowly fulfill the very fear they carried from the beginning. The words spoken were identical. The realities that followed were completely different. Where did those different realities begin? Not in the manager, within the listener. The Hermetic philosophers would have recognized this immediately. To them, life was continually reflecting the quality of consciousness brought into every encounter. The reflection itself was never the origin, it was the consequence. This insight explains why changing external circumstances often produces only temporary relief. Someone leaves an unhealthy relationship, believing they have escaped the source of their unhappiness, only to find themselves repeating nearly identical patterns with another partner years later. A person changes careers expecting fulfillment, yet somehow discovers the same frustrations waiting under a different company logo. Another moves across the country hoping for a fresh start, only to discover that the fears they wished to escape somehow arrived at the new address before they did. Why? Because geography rarely transforms consciousness. The scenery changes, the observer remains the same. The ancient Greeks understood this through the timeless inscription carved above the temple of Apollo at Delphi, "Know thyself." Those two words became one of the foundations of Western philosophy, not because self-knowledge was considered interesting, because it was considered necessary. Without knowing ourselves, every judgment we make about the world remains incomplete. We confuse reactions with reality, assumptions with facts, habit with truth. The Delphic inscription appears almost deceptively simple, yet generations of philosophers return to it again and again. Socrates believed that the unexamined life was not worth living because a person who never questions their own mind becomes governed by it without ever realizing it. The Hermetic philosophers carried this insight even further. They believed the quality of one's entire life depended upon the degree to which one understood the invisible forces operating within. Perhaps this is why genuine wisdom has always required humility. It is far easier to diagnose another person's shortcomings than to recognize our own. It is easier to explain why others continue making mistakes than to notice the beliefs quietly shaping our own decisions every day. The mirror asks us to do something profoundly uncomfortable. It asks us to look inward before looking outward. For many people, this feels like weakness. The Hermetic masters considered it strength, because only what is seen can be transformed. There is an old story, repeated in different forms across several ancient traditions, about a traveler who spent his entire life searching for a hidden kingdom. He crossed mountains, sailed dangerous seas, studied with celebrated teachers, and collected maps from every land he visited. Each new guide promised that the kingdom lay just beyond the next horizon. Yet, no matter how far he traveled, it always remained beyond his reach. One evening, exhausted and discouraged, the traveler arrived at the home of an elderly hermit who listened patiently as he described decades of searching. When the traveler finally finished, the old man asked only one question. "Tell me," he said, "when was the last time you searched the one place you have carried with you every day of your life?" The traveler looked confused. "The one place?" he asked. "The one place," the hermit replied, "from which every journey truly begins. Whether the story happened exactly as it is told is impossible to know. Stories such as these survive because they express truths more effectively than arguments." The Hermetic philosophers understood this well. They knew the human mind often resists direct instruction while remaining strangely open to symbols and stories. A single image, remembered at the right moment, can alter a life more profoundly than an entire library of forgotten explanations. The traveler in the story is every one of us. How often do we search outside ourselves for what can only be understood within? We search for confidence through achievement rather than examining the beliefs that quietly undermine it. We search for peace by changing circumstances while carrying the same restless mind into every new environment. We search for purpose through constant activity, hoping that movement itself will eventually reveal direction. Sometimes it does. More often, movement simply distracts us from questions waiting patiently beneath the noise. This is why the law of reflection is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. It is honest. It refuses to flatter us with the comforting illusion that every problem originates elsewhere. Yet it also refuses to burden us with the equally destructive belief that we are powerless before circumstances. Instead, it offers a third possibility, that every experience contains information. The successful person asks different questions than the unsuccessful one. The peaceful person notices different things than the anxious one. The wise person pays attention to causes long before consequences become visible. This way of thinking may feel unfamiliar, yet modern psychology has quietly arrived at remarkably similar conclusions. One of the most influential discoveries of the 20th century was the realization that human beings do not simply perceive the world as it is. We perceive it through mental frameworks constructed over years of experience. These frameworks help us navigate reality efficiently, but they also introduce countless distortions without our awareness. Two witnesses can observe the same accident and later describe it differently, not because either intends to deceive, because each mind automatically emphasizes certain details while overlooking others. Expectation influences observation, emotion influences memory, belief influences interpretation. Long before laboratories demonstrated these tendencies, the Hermetic sages had already recognized them through careful observation of human nature. Carl Jung, whose work transformed modern psychology, believed that much of what disturbs us in other people often reveals something hidden within ourselves. He described this phenomenon through the concept of the shadow, the aspects of our own personality that remain unrecognized, denied, or pushed beyond conscious awareness. The more fiercely we reject these qualities within ourselves, the more powerfully we tend to notice them in others. The world we experience is always, to some degree, the meeting place between external events and the consciousness interpreting them. This realization is neither mystical nor abstract. It is profoundly practical. Imagine entering every difficult conversation with the assumption that the other person is trying to attack you. Notice how your body responds before a single word is spoken. Your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your attention narrows, your tone becomes defensive. Without intending to, you begin creating the very atmosphere you feared from the beginning. Now imagine entering the same conversation with genuine curiosity, not naive optimism, simply curiosity. What if there is something here I have not yet understood? Immediately, the quality of the interaction begins to change. The questions become different. The listening becomes deeper. The possibilities multiply. The mirror responds. Not because reality has suddenly become kinder, because your relationship with reality has changed. The Hermetic philosophers believed these seemingly ordinary moments were among the most important in human life. For destinies are rarely shaped only by extraordinary events. They are shaped by thousands of ordinary moments in which consciousness quietly chooses how it will meet the world. Every one of those choices leaves an imprint. Everyone becomes part of the person we are becoming, and everyone prepares us for the next reflection waiting patiently around the corner. There is a quiet discipline practiced by nearly every great tradition of wisdom, though it is often described using different language. The Buddhists speak of mindfulness. The Stoics speak of examining impressions before accepting them as truth. The desert mystics speak of watching the movements of the heart. The Hermetic philosophers speak of observation. At first glance, these practices appear different, yet they all point toward the same remarkable discovery. Between an event and your response exists a moment that most people never notice. It is extraordinarily brief, sometimes no longer than the space between two breaths. Yet within that small interval lies one of the greatest powers available to any human being. Imagine someone insults you. The words arrive through your ears almost instantly, but anger does not emerge from the sound itself. Between hearing the words and reacting to them, your mind quietly interprets what they mean. It compares them with memories. It searches for old wounds. It asks whether the criticism confirms a fear already hidden inside you. Only then does emotion begin to take shape. The Hermetic masters trained themselves to become aware of this invisible process, not because they wished to suppress emotion, but because they understood that unconscious interpretation quietly determines conscious experience. Most people never notice this moment. Everything feels immediate. I became angry because of what they said. I became anxious because of what happened. I lost confidence because I failed. Yet if this were entirely true, every person would react identically to the same event. They clearly do not. Some people emerge from profound hardship with remarkable compassion. Others emerge bitter. Some become wiser through failure. Others become imprisoned by it. Some experience tremendous success only to remain deeply unhappy. Others find joy while possessing very little. The external event matters. The interpretation matters even more. This insight may be one of the greatest gifts hidden within the Emerald Tablet. It quietly returns responsibility to the place where transformation actually becomes possible. Not in controlling the entire world, not in controlling other people, not even in controlling every circumstance, but in becoming aware of the relationship between consciousness and experience. This awareness is not achieved overnight. Like learning a musical instrument, it develops through repeated practice. The first time a pianist sits before the keys, every movement feels awkward. Their fingers hesitate. Their attention becomes divided between rhythm, posture, and melody. Yet after years of practice, those same movements appear almost effortless. The music flows because discipline has slowly become nature. Observation develops in much the same way. At first, you remember only after the argument. I should have responded differently. Then one day you remember during the argument. You notice your heartbeat increasing. You notice your breathing becoming shallow. You recognize the familiar story beginning to replay inside your mind. Perhaps for the first time, you pause. Nothing dramatic happens. The room does not fill with light. The heavens do not open. Yet something infinitely more important begins. Choice appears. Where previously there had only been reaction, there is now awareness. Where awareness enters, freedom quietly follows. The Hermetic philosophers regarded this moment as the beginning of mastery. Not mastery over other people, not mastery over the external world, mastery over oneself. It is impossible to exaggerate the importance of this distinction. History is filled with individuals who mastered kingdoms while remaining slaves to anger. Others accumulated extraordinary wealth while remaining prisoners of fear. Some gained influence over millions, yet never learned to govern their own thoughts. The Hermetic tradition never confused power with wisdom. To the contrary, it warned that external power without internal understanding often becomes the source of even greater suffering. This idea found expression in the lives of many remarkable individuals. Consider the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius once again. Few people in history possessed greater political authority. Armies answered his command. Entire provinces depended upon his decisions. Yet in the private journal we now know as the Meditations, he returned again and again to one simple truth. The only mind he could truly govern was his own. Everything else remained uncertain. Fortune changed, politics changed, health changed, the opinions of others changed. Only character remained continually available for cultivation. The Hermetic masters would have recognized in this a profound understanding of reflection. For what the world continually reveals to us is not merely its changing nature, but our own. Every difficulty asks a question. Every success asks a question. Every relationship asks a question. Who are you becoming through this experience? Notice that the question is not what happened, nor is it who is responsible. The deeper question concerns transformation. The alchemists understood this perhaps better than anyone. To the casual observer, they appeared obsessed with turning ordinary metals into gold. For centuries, historians debated whether this was their true objective. Today, many scholars believe the physical experiments concealed a far deeper symbolic process. Lead represented the unrefined human condition, fear, ignorance, pride, attachment. Gold represented something entirely different. Wisdom, clarity, balance, awareness. The laboratory stood as a symbol for the human soul itself. Whether every alchemist understood the symbolism in precisely this way remains open to debate, but one thing is beyond dispute. Again and again, the literature of alchemy returns not merely to changing matter, but to changing the person performing the work. The transformation of the alchemist was inseparable from the transformation of the substance. This realization changes the way we understand the law of reflection. The mirror does not exist to judge you. It exists to educate you. It patiently reveals where fear still governs your choices. It reveals where resentment quietly shapes perception. It reveals where old stories continue directing new decisions. It also reveals your courage, your kindness, your resilience, your capacity to grow beyond who you once believed yourself to be. In this sense, life becomes the greatest teacher imaginable. Every day offers another lesson. Every conversation becomes another mirror. Every disappointment becomes another invitation to understand yourself more deeply. This is why the Hermetic philosophers never separated philosophy from daily life. Wisdom was never intended to remain inside books. Its proper home was ordinary experience. The family dinner, the difficult meeting, the unexpected setback, the quiet morning before the rest of the world awakens. These ordinary moments are where the Emerald Tablet truly comes alive, not because they are extraordinary, because they are constant. Eventually, a remarkable shift begins to occur. Instead of asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" you begin asking, "What is this experience trying to reveal?" Instead of wondering, "Who ruined my peace?" you begin wondering, "What within me was disturbed?" Instead of chasing endless changes in circumstance, you begin cultivating the one place from which every lasting change eventually emerges: your own consciousness. The ancient Hermetic teachers believed this marked the true beginning of wisdom. Not the accumulation of knowledge, not the memorization of sacred texts, but the willingness to see oneself clearly. For only what is seen can be transformed. Only what is acknowledged can be healed. Only what is understood can finally be released. And once that inner transformation begins, another extraordinary discovery gradually comes into view. If the outer world continually reflects the inner world, then perhaps the relationship between inner and outer is not merely symbolic. Perhaps it is one of the fundamental laws upon which reality itself is built. The Emerald Tablet expresses this law in a single sentence, a sentence so famous that it has been repeated for centuries. Yet few pause long enough to consider its true meaning. As within, so without. As above, so below. Those words are not simply poetry. They are the doorway to everything that follows. Chapter 3. As within, so without. There is a phrase so closely associated with the Emerald Tablet that many people believe it is the entire teaching. It has appeared in books on philosophy, psychology, spirituality, leadership, manifestation, and even modern business. It has been quoted by mystics, scientists, artists, and seekers across centuries. Entire libraries have been written attempting to explain its meaning, yet despite its popularity, it remains one of the most misunderstood sentences ever recorded. As within, so without. As above, so below. Most people hear these words and immediately assume they are being told that positive thoughts create positive circumstances, or that negative thinking attracts unfortunate events. While there is a small measure of truth hidden within those interpretations, they barely scratch the surface of what the Hermetic philosophers were attempting to communicate. The statement is far older, far deeper, and far more revolutionary. To understand it, we must first examine something so ordinary that we rarely stop to notice it. Every human being inhabits two worlds at the same time. The first is obvious. It is the external world, the people we meet, the places we travel, the conversations we have, the work we do, the successes we celebrate, the disappointments we endure. This is the world our senses constantly report back to us. The second world is almost entirely invisible. It consists of memories, beliefs, expectations, dreams, regrets, interpretations, fears, hopes, silent conversations we have with ourselves every day without speaking a single word aloud. Although invisible, this inner world quietly influences almost everything we call reality. Consider two strangers walking through the same city on the same afternoon. The streets are identical. The weather is identical. The sounds drifting through the air are identical. Yet one person notices beauty almost everywhere they look. Children laughing in a nearby park, sunlight reflecting from old buildings, music escaping through an open cafe window. They return home believing they spent the day in a vibrant city filled with warmth and possibility. The other notices something entirely different: traffic, noise, impatient people, construction, long queues. By evening, they are convinced they spent the day surrounded by stress and disorder. Which person experienced the real city? The answer, surprisingly, is both, because neither experienced the city directly. Each experience the meeting place between the city itself and the consciousness observing it. This simple realization has profound implications. It suggests that what we call reality is never entirely external, nor is it entirely internal. It emerges through the continual interaction between both. Long before neuroscience began studying attention, perception, and cognitive filtering, the Hermetic philosophers had already recognized that consciousness behaves less like a camera recording objective reality and more like a sculptor continuously shaping experience into meaning. The world presents possibilities. The mind selects significance. The two are never completely separate. This is why the Emerald Tablet never encourages us to reject the physical world in favor of some purely spiritual existence, nor does it encourage us to become lost entirely within subjective feelings. Instead, it invites us to recognize the relationship constantly unfolding between inner and outer, visible and invisible, thought and action, perception and circumstance. Everything exists in conversation with everything else. This principle appears repeatedly throughout nature. The roots of a tree remain hidden beneath the earth, yet every branch above the ground depends entirely upon them. We admire the leaves because they are visible, but the unseen roots determine whether those leaves flourish or wither. Likewise, a building may appear magnificent from the street, while its foundation quietly develops cracks no passerby can see. Months or years later, the damage finally reaches the surface. To the casual observer, the collapse seems sudden. To the engineer, it began long before the walls showed the first visible sign. The Hermetic masters looked upon human life in exactly the same way. Visible experiences are often the final expression of invisible processes already unfolding beneath awareness. The argument that suddenly destroys a friendship rarely began that afternoon. The confidence that carries someone through extraordinary challenges was not created on the day adversity appeared. The peace that seems effortless in certain individuals was cultivated through countless unseen choices made long before anyone noticed its presence. The outer world continually announces what has been quietly growing within. This is why the Emerald Tablet speaks of correspondence rather than coincidence. Correspondence implies relationship, harmony, reflection, one level of reality expressing itself through another. The phrase, "as within, so without," therefore does not suggest that life mechanically grants every passing wish. It suggests something far more subtle. The condition of our inner world gradually shapes the quality of our participation in the outer one. If fear quietly governs perception, opportunities often appear dangerous before they appear promising. If resentment governs perception, kindness becomes difficult to recognize. If gratitude governs perception, even ordinary moments begin revealing extraordinary richness. The world itself has not necessarily changed. The relationship has. This distinction protects us from one of the greatest misunderstandings surrounding Hermetic philosophy. The Emerald Tablet is not asking us to blame ourselves whenever difficulty enters our lives. Storms arrive for everyone. Loss visits every family. Illness does not consult belief before appearing. History itself demonstrates that innocent people often endure profound suffering. The Hermetic tradition never denies these realities. Instead, it asks a different question. When life places us before unavoidable circumstances, what quality of consciousness will we bring to meet them? That question belongs entirely within our power. And history suggests it is often the answer to that question which determines whether suffering becomes bitterness or wisdom. Perhaps this is why the wisest individuals throughout history were rarely distinguished by lives free from hardship. More often, they were distinguished by the remarkable way they responded to it. The law of correspondence begins there, not in changing the world, but in understanding the mysterious conversation that has always existed between the world and the one who is experiencing it. There is an image that appears repeatedly throughout the world's wisdom traditions. Sometimes it is a river reflecting the sky. Sometimes it is the moon mirrored upon still water. Sometimes it is a perfectly polished mirror hanging within the temple of an ancient mystery school. Although the symbols differ, they all attempt to express the same truth. The visible world is constantly revealing something about the invisible one. For centuries, scholars have debated the precise meaning of the phrase, "as above, so below." Many assume it refers only to astrology or the relationship between the heavens and the earth. Certainly, the Hermetic philosophers believed the movements of the heavens possessed profound significance. Ancient civilizations watched the stars with extraordinary attention, convinced that the rhythms governing the cosmos were reflected within the rhythms of human existence. But the principle reaches far beyond astronomy. It is a statement about pattern. Look closely enough, and similar structures begin appearing everywhere. The spiral of a distant galaxy resembles the spiral of a seashell resting upon a beach. The branching of rivers resembles the branching of trees. The intricate network of blood vessels within the human body echoes the branching patterns of roots spreading beneath a forest floor. Lightning crossing the night sky resembles the neurons firing within the human brain. These similarities fascinated ancient observers long before mathematics gave them names. To them, nature was not repeating itself by accident. It was expressing the same intelligence through different forms. The Hermetic philosophers believed this correspondence extended beyond physical structures into human consciousness itself. The patterns governing the greater universe also appeared in subtler ways within the individual. This is why they regarded the human being as a microcosm, a small universe reflecting the greater one. At first, this idea sounds almost poetic, yet pause for a moment and consider your own body. Without any conscious effort, your heart has been beating since before you were born. Millions of cells cooperate with astonishing precision every second. Your lungs exchange oxygen without requiring your attention. Your immune system identifies countless threats long before your conscious mind becomes aware of them. Entire civilizations could scarcely organize themselves with the efficiency quietly unfolding inside a single human body every moment of every day. Order already exists within you. The Hermetic philosophers simply asked a larger question. If such extraordinary intelligence exists within the smallest structures of life, why should we assume the larger structure we call the universe is governed by randomness alone? This question does not demand blind belief. It invites careful observation. Stand beneath the night sky long enough, and something remarkable begins to happen. The concerns occupying your mind gradually become quieter. The endless urgency of everyday life softens. For a brief moment, you experience yourself not merely as an isolated individual struggling through personal circumstances, but as part of something immeasurably larger. This experience has been described by astronauts viewing Earth from space. It has been described by monks meditating in mountain monasteries. It has been described by sailors crossing vast oceans and by shepherds spending solitary nights beneath countless stars. Across cultures and centuries, people separated by language and history report something remarkably similar: the realization that life is interconnected. The Emerald Tablet gives philosophical language to that experience. It proposes that separation is often a useful illusion rather than ultimate reality. The tree appears separate from the soil, yet remove the soil and the tree cannot survive. The wave appears separate from the ocean, yet without the ocean, the wave never exists. Likewise, we often imagine ourselves as isolated beings moving through an indifferent universe. The Hermetic masters suggested something entirely different. We are expressions of the very order we spend our lives searching for. This realization changes the meaning of spiritual practice itself. Many people approach spirituality hoping to escape the ordinary world. The Hermetic philosophers sought something else entirely. They wished to understand it. For them, there was no sharp division between sacred and ordinary. Preparing a meal, tending a garden, speaking honestly, keeping one's promises, watching the sunrise, listening with complete attention. These were not distractions from wisdom. They were opportunities to observe universal principles, expressing themselves through ordinary life. Perhaps this explains why so many of history's wisest individuals possessed an extraordinary appreciation for simple things. They were not searching endlessly for spectacular experiences because they had learned to recognize profound truths hidden inside ordinary moments. A falling leaf became a lesson. A changing season became a teacher. The patient growth of a tree revealed more about life than endless argument ever could. The Emerald Tablet encourages precisely this way of seeing. Instead of asking, "What extraordinary event must happen before my life changes?" it asks, "What ordinary pattern have I failed to notice?" The answer is often closer than we imagine. Consider breathing. You inhale. You exhale. Receive. Release. Every moment of life depends upon this rhythm. Imagine trying to inhale forever without exhaling. Life itself would become impossible. Yet many people unconsciously approach success this way. They seek to accumulate endlessly. More possessions, more recognition, more achievement, without ever learning the equally important wisdom of release. Release resentment. Release outdated identities. Release beliefs that no longer serve growth. Nature never clings. Every autumn reminds us of this. Trees do not mourn each leaf that falls. They understand something human beings often forget. What appears to be loss may actually be preparation. Only by releasing one season can another arrive. The Hermetic philosophers observed these patterns everywhere they looked, not because they wished to romanticize nature, because nature consistently demonstrated principles human beings repeatedly ignored. The universe was already teaching. Most people simply were not listening. There is another misunderstanding worth addressing before we continue. Some imagine correspondence means every event possesses one perfect interpretation waiting to be discovered. The Hermetic tradition never makes such a claim. Reality is richer than that. A single experience may contain many lessons depending upon the stage of growth reached by the individual encountering it. The same book transforms one reader while leaving another unchanged. The same conversation inspires one person and irritates another. The same failure destroys one individual's confidence while awakening another's determination. Correspondence is not rigid, it is alive. It meets each person where they are. This is why wisdom cannot simply be transferred from one mind to another, like information copied between machines. It must become experience. Only then does knowledge mature into understanding. Only then does understanding become transformation. Perhaps this explains why the Emerald Tablet has survived for so many centuries while remaining only a page in length. It was never intended to answer every question. Its purpose was to awaken better ones. Questions that accompany a person for years. Questions that quietly reshape perception until the world itself begins to look different. Once that shift begins, another discovery naturally follows. If the universe continually expresses itself through vibration, if every thought, emotion, and action participates in movement rather than stillness, then understanding correspondence is only the beginning. To understand how reality changes, we must next understand the language through which reality itself moves. The Hermetic philosophers gave that language a simple name: vibration. And it is to that extraordinary principle that we now turn. There is one final truth hidden within the law of correspondence that the ancient Hermetic philosophers returned to again and again, and it may be the most practical of them all. The universe is always teaching, not occasionally, not only during moments of great tragedy or extraordinary success. Always. The difficulty is not that life withholds its lessons. The difficulty is that we spend so much of our attention trying to escape our present experience that we rarely pause long enough to understand what it is attempting to reveal. Think back over your own life. There were undoubtedly moments that once felt like devastating failures, doors that closed despite your greatest efforts, relationships that ended when you believed they would last forever, opportunities that disappeared without explanation. At the time, many of those experiences probably appeared meaningless, perhaps even cruel. Yet, with enough distance, something remarkable often happens. What once looked like a disaster quietly reveals itself as a turning point. The career you lost forced you to discover work that was far more meaningful. The relationship that ended prevented years of unhappiness you could not yet see. The disappointment that once filled you with resentment became the very experience that taught compassion toward others. The event itself did not change. Your understanding of it did. This is correspondence in action. The outer event remained fixed in the past. The inner world continued evolving. As the inner world changed, the meaning reflected by the outer event changed with it. This is one of the greatest freedoms available to a human being. We cannot always rewrite history, but we can continually deepen our understanding of it. And as understanding deepens, the emotional weight of the past often begins to dissolve. The Hermetic philosophers believed this was not merely psychological healing. It was a form of alchemy, raw experience gradually becoming wisdom, the ordinary becoming extraordinary, lead becoming gold. Perhaps this is why the ancient alchemists spoke so often of patience. Modern culture celebrates speed, faster communication, faster travel, faster results, faster success. Yet almost everything of lasting value develops slowly. A mighty oak spends decades becoming what a flower accomplishes in a season. Fine wine matures over years. Great friendships deepen through countless ordinary conversations. Character is formed one decision at a time. Wisdom is accumulated one observation at a time. No one awakens fully in a single afternoon. Transformation has its own rhythm. The Emerald Tablet repeatedly reminds us that nature never hurries, yet nothing essential is left unfinished. A river never competes with another river. It simply continues flowing. The sunrise never arrives early because someone is impatient. Spring does not apologize for taking its time. Everything unfolds according to principles far older than human urgency. There is something deeply comforting about this realization. It reminds us that growth cannot always be measured by immediate results. Sometimes the greatest changes occur beneath the surface where no one else can see them. Just as roots deepen long before branches reach toward the sky, understanding often matures quietly before it becomes visible in our lives. The Hermetic teachers knew this. That is why they encourage students to observe not merely dramatic breakthroughs, but ordinary moments. The quality of a single conversation, the thoughts repeatedly returning during solitude, the emotions quietly appearing whenever particular situations arise, the stories we tell ourselves without questioning whether they are true. These small observations become surprisingly powerful over time. A sailor crossing an ocean does not constantly change direction. Instead, they make countless tiny adjustments guided by the stars. Each adjustment appears insignificant. Together they determine whether the ship reaches its destination. Life unfolds in much the same way. Transformation rarely arrives through one extraordinary decision. More often it emerges through hundreds of quiet corrections made almost unnoticed. A little more honesty, a little less fear, a little more patience, a little less pride. Each adjustment seems almost invisible on its own. Years later, an entirely different person stands where the old one once lived. This is the deeper promise of the Emerald Tablet. Not that life suddenly becomes effortless. Not that pain disappears forever. Not that every dream immediately comes true. Its promise is far more profound. It teaches that the universe is intelligible, that beneath confusion there is order. Beneath apparent randomness there are patterns. Beneath every experience there exists the possibility of greater understanding. Once this possibility is accepted, even life's most difficult moments begin to change their character. They no longer appear merely as interruptions. They become invitations. Invitations to observe. Invitations to grow. Invitations to understand ourselves more deeply than before. The Hermetic philosophers believed that every person receives these invitations continually throughout life. Most are declined, not intentionally, simply because they are not recognized. The lesson disguised as disappointment, the opportunity disguised as inconvenience, the teacher disguised as an adversary, the blessing disguised as delay. The Emerald Tablet asks us to look again, to wonder whether life has been speaking a language we simply never learned to hear. If that language truly exists, then every event carries more than one level of meaning, the visible meaning and the invisible principle expressing itself through it. Learning to recognize that principle is the beginning of wisdom. Learning to live in harmony with it is the beginning of freedom. Yet correspondence alone cannot explain how this invisible dialogue unfolds. If reality reflects inner conditions, if every level of existence participates in the same underlying order, then by what mechanism does this relationship occur? How does an unseen thought eventually become visible action? How does an emotion linger long enough to influence an entire life? How does a single idea spread across generations, changing civilizations long after the person who first imagined it has disappeared? The Hermetic philosophers believed they knew the answer. Everything moves, everything changes, everything lives through motion. Nothing remains perfectly still. Beneath every object, every thought, every emotion, every star, every living creature, there exists an invisible movement continually shaping the universe from within. They called this movement vibration. To understand vibration is to understand the hidden current flowing beneath every experience you have ever had. It is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, the silent force through which possibility gradually becomes reality. And it is there that the Emerald Tablet begins revealing one of its most extraordinary secrets. Chapter 4. The Law of Vibration. Walk into an old cathedral when no one else is there. Stand quietly for a few moments. Before your eyes begin exploring the architecture, before your mind starts analyzing the details, notice something else. The silence. It is different from the silence inside an ordinary room. It feels deeper, almost alive. Now leave the cathedral and walk into a crowded train station during rush hour. Nothing visible about you has changed. You are the same person wearing the same clothes, carrying the same memories and responsibilities. Yet within seconds, your breathing changes. Your attention becomes scattered. Your body grows alert. Your thoughts begin moving faster. Nothing has touched you. No one has spoken to you. And yet, something about the environment has already begun influencing your inner experience. For thousands of years, human beings have noticed this phenomenon without fully understanding it. Certain places seem peaceful before a single word is spoken. Others feel heavy Some homes immediately create a sense of comfort. Others quietly produce tension, even when everything appears perfectly normal. We often dismiss these impressions as imagination. The Hermetic philosophers did not. They believed these experiences offered one of the clearest demonstrations of a law operating continuously beneath ordinary awareness. Everything vibrates. At first, this statement sounds almost mystical, yet in many ways it is one of the least controversial observations we can make about reality. Strike the string of a violin and it vibrates. Speak a word aloud and the air itself vibrates. Light travels in waves, sound travels in waves. Even the ground beneath your feet is never perfectly still. Mountains slowly rise and erode. Oceans breathe with the tides. Continents drift across the surface of the earth so gradually that entire civilizations live and disappear before noticing the movement. Stillness, it turns out, is often movement unfolding too slowly or too subtly for our senses to perceive. The Hermetic philosophers recognized this long before the language of modern science existed. They observed that everything in existence appeared to participate in continual motion. Nothing remained fixed forever. Children became adults. Summer became autumn. Empires rose and eventually fell. Stars were born, burned brilliantly, and disappeared into the vastness from which they had emerged. Movement was not merely something occurring within the universe. Movement was the universe. This realization became one of the central principles preserved within the Hermetic tradition. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. Those words have survived for centuries because they describe something every human being can observe directly. Place your hand against your chest. Your heart refuses stillness. Hold your wrist gently. Your pulse quietly announces itself. Close your eyes and pay attention to your breathing. Even in complete silence, life continues moving. Motion is the signature of existence itself. Yet the Hermetic philosophers believed physical movement represented only the outermost layer of a much deeper truth. Thought moves, emotion moves, attention moves, ideas move, cultures move, history itself moves. An invention imagined by one person spreads across nations. A single speech alters the direction of an entire generation. One act of extraordinary courage inspires countless others long after the original event has passed into history. Movement exists not only in matter, it exists in meaning. This is where the law of vibration begins revealing its deeper significance. Imagine dropping a small pebble into the surface of a perfectly still lake. The pebble disappears almost immediately, yet the movement it creates continues outward in expanding circles. The original impact occupies only a single point. The consequences travel far beyond it. Now imagine replacing the pebble with a single decision, choosing forgiveness instead of resentment, speaking honestly instead of hiding the truth, offering encouragement when criticism would have been easier. At first glance, these choices seem insignificant, small, almost invisible. Yet every choice quietly sends ripples through relationships, families, communities, and eventually through generations of people we may never meet. History is filled with examples. A teacher encourages a struggling child. That child grows into a physician who saves thousands of lives. An unknown monk quietly copies ancient manuscripts while empires collapse around him. Centuries later, those writings become the foundation of entire civilizations. A scientist refuses to abandon an impossible idea. Decades later, humanity understands the universe differently because of a question one person refused to stop asking. The original action was small. Its vibration continued. Perhaps this explains why the Hermetic philosophers placed such extraordinary importance upon ordinary decisions. They understood something modern culture often forgets. Life is rarely transformed by a single dramatic moment. More often it changes through countless subtle movements accumulating over time. One conversation, one habit, one perspective, one repeated thought. Each appears insignificant in isolation. Together, they become a life. Modern psychology has reached a remarkably similar conclusion. Neuroscientists often describe the brain as a living network continually strengthening the pathways we use most frequently. Thoughts repeated often become easier to think again. Emotional responses practiced repeatedly become increasingly automatic. Habits once requiring tremendous effort gradually become almost effortless because the nervous system learns through repetition. Although the language differs, the observation echoes the Hermetic tradition. What moves repeatedly gathers strength. What receives attention grows. What is neglected gradually weakens. The Emerald Tablet invites us to consider this principle not only within the brain but throughout existence itself. Everything participates in movement. Everything influences something beyond itself. Nothing exists entirely alone. This realization changes the way we think about responsibility. Most people imagine responsibility as something heavy, a burden, an obligation. The Hermetic philosophers saw it differently. To them, responsibility simply meant recognizing that every movement contributes to larger patterns. Not every movement changes the entire world, but every movement changes something. Even silence changes a conversation. Even hesitation changes a decision. Even a single encouraging sentence may remain alive in another person's memory for decades. We rarely know how far our own vibrations travel. Perhaps that uncertainty is precisely why wisdom matters so much. Because once we recognize that nothing we think, say, or do exists entirely in isolation, ordinary moments become unexpectedly sacred. The smallest gesture may carry consequences invisible to us. The quietest kindness may continue moving through lives we never meet. The Hermetic masters therefore urged their students to pay attention not merely to great ambitions, but to everyday habits. For the quality of one's life is rarely determined by extraordinary moments alone. It is determined by the countless vibrations quietly repeated while no one else is watching. Wakefulness begins there, not in spectacular revelations, but in noticing the invisible movements already shaping the visible world. If there is one place where the ancient world perhaps understood vibration more intuitively than we do today, it was through sound. Long before music became entertainment, it was considered a force. Ancient civilizations believed sound possessed the remarkable ability to shape both the human mind and the environment around it. Egyptian priests carefully memorized sacred chants, whose pronunciation was preserved with extraordinary precision. In India, Vedic teachers spent years training students to recite mantras with exact rhythm and tone, convinced that altering even a single syllable changed the quality of the practice itself. Greek philosophers, particularly the followers of Pythagoras, regarded music not merely as an art, but as mathematics made audible, revealing hidden relationships that governed the structure of reality. To the modern mind, these traditions may appear symbolic. To the Hermetic philosopher, they were observational. Strike a tuning fork beside another tuning fork tuned to the same note. Without touching it, the second fork begins to vibrate. The first has transferred nothing visible. No physical object has crossed the space between them, yet something undeniably real has moved. This simple phenomenon, known today as resonance, fascinated thinkers throughout history because it hinted at a principle extending far beyond sound itself. Things sharing similar qualities naturally influence one another. The Hermetic philosophers believed human beings behaved similarly. Spend enough time with someone whose outlook is hopeful, disciplined, and generous, and you may notice subtle changes taking place within yourself. You begin speaking differently. Your expectations quietly rise. Possibilities that once seemed unrealistic become imaginable. The influence often occurs so gradually that it escapes conscious notice. The opposite is equally true. Remain for years in an environment dominated by bitterness, constant criticism, or fear, and those emotional habits begin reproducing themselves almost automatically. Cynicism becomes normal. Distrust becomes wisdom. Hope begins feeling naive rather than courageous. The vibration of a place does not force us to become anything. It simply invites certain qualities while making others more difficult to sustain. This may explain why every civilization has placed such importance upon the environments in which people live. Monasteries were built away from crowded cities. Libraries were treated as sacred spaces. Gardens were cultivated not only for food, but for contemplation. Even architecture reflected this understanding. Cathedrals reached upward toward the heavens. Temples invited silence before speech. Their builders seemed to understand that the spaces surrounding human beings quietly influence the spaces within them. Have you ever noticed how your thoughts change while walking through an ancient forest? No one instructs you to lower your voice. No sign demands that you slow your pace. Yet something within you responds almost instinctively. The towering trees, the filtered sunlight, the rhythm of birdsong carried on the wind, all of it seems to invite a different quality of attention. The forest has not spoken, yet somehow it has communicated. Likewise, there are places where anxiety seems almost contagious. An emergency room, a financial trading floor during a market crash, a stadium moments before the final whistle of an important match. The emotional atmosphere becomes so powerful that even someone arriving without prior knowledge quickly senses it. The Hermetic philosophers would describe this not as superstition, but as one expression of vibration. Everything participates, everything influences, everything contributes. Modern science, though using different language, increasingly recognizes that human beings constantly affect one another through subtle signals. Facial expressions change almost unconsciously in response to those around us. The tone of one person's voice influences the emotional state of another. Groups often begin matching one another's pace, posture, and even breathing without deliberate intention. Psychologists refer to emotional contagion. Neuroscientists study mirror neurons. Sociologists examine the spread of ideas and behaviors across communities. The vocabulary has changed. The observation has not. We are continually influencing one another in ways far more intricate than ordinary awareness usually perceives. This realization carries tremendous responsibility. Many people hope to improve their lives while remaining surrounded by influences that quietly pull them in the opposite direction. They wonder why new habits fail despite genuine determination. The Hermetic philosophers would gently suggest examining not only personal effort, but the environment supporting that effort. A seed planted in fertile soil requires far less struggle than one planted among stones. The seed is not weaker, the conditions are different. Likewise, transformation rarely depends upon willpower alone. The company we keep, the conversations we encourage, the books we read, the music filling our homes, the thoughts we repeatedly entertain. Each becomes part of the atmosphere from which tomorrow's character quietly grows. This is one reason the ancient mystery schools placed extraordinary care upon initiation. New students were not immediately entrusted with deeper teachings. They first learned discipline, silence, observation, patience. Not because knowledge needed protection from the student, because the student needed preparation for the knowledge. The quality of the vessel influences what it can hold. Pour the purest water into a cracked container and little remains. Strengthen the vessel first, and the water may finally serve its purpose. The same principle appears throughout nature. Rain falling upon hard stone quickly disappears. The very same rain falling upon fertile earth gives birth to forests. The difference is not the rain. It is the condition of what receives it. Perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than in education. Two students sit in the same classroom, listening to the same teacher explain the same lesson. One hears information. The other discovers a calling that shapes the rest of their life. The lecture was identical. The inner readiness was not. The Hermetic philosophers believed readiness itself possesses a kind of vibration, not a mystical force measured by instruments, but a quality of openness through which understanding becomes possible. This is why genuine wisdom cannot be forced upon another person. It must meet a prepared mind. The Emerald Tablet has waited nearly 2,000 years for countless readers. Some glance at its famous words and continue walking. Others spend a lifetime contemplating a single sentence. The text has not changed. The reader has. This may be one of the quietest yet most profound expressions of the law of vibration. Reality continually offers possibilities. What we are capable of receiving depends upon what we have become prepared to perceive. Perhaps that is why two people can read the same page and leave carrying entirely different worlds. The vibration was present. Only one was ready to resonate with it. There is one final lesson hidden within the law of vibration that the Hermetic philosophers considered essential before a student could advance to the deeper teachings of the Emerald Tablet. Everything influences everything else. At first, this sounds almost obvious. Of course, our actions influence those around us. Of course, our words carry consequences. Of course, kindness encourages kindness, while cruelty often gives rise to more cruelty. Yet the Hermetic masters were pointing toward something far more expansive. They believed influence itself was woven into the structure of existence. Imagine standing at the edge of a still lake just before sunrise. The surface is perfectly calm. You gently place your fingertip into the water. The movement is almost imperceptible. A tiny circle forms, then another, then another. Within moments, ripples spread across the entire surface. Now ask yourself a simple question. Where does the influence of your touch end? Can you identify the exact point where the movement ceases to belong to your finger and becomes simply the movement of the lake itself? You cannot. The moment contact was made, the lake accepted your action into its own unfolding. The Hermetic philosophers believed human life operates in precisely the same way. Every conversation becomes part of another person's memory. Every decision influences future decisions. Every act of generosity alters not only the recipient, but often everyone who witnesses it. Likewise, every harsh word, every broken promise, every moment of unnecessary cruelty continues traveling far beyond the instant in which it occurred. Most of these ripples remain invisible to us. That does not mean they are absent. History repeatedly reminds us of this truth. A single speech inspires a movement. One scientific discovery transforms medicine for generations. An unknown teacher encourages a child who later changes the course of history. Conversely, one moment of hatred can ignite conflicts lasting centuries. One careless decision can reshape countless lives. The Hermetic philosophers therefore urged extraordinary care with ordinary moments, not because they feared punishment, because they understood participation. No one lives separately from the larger whole. Every life becomes part of every other life. This realization gives new meaning to responsibility. Responsibility is not a burden placed upon us by society. It is the natural consequence of belonging to an interconnected universe. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we are continually influencing the world simply by the way we move through it. The question is not whether we leave an impression. The question is what kind of impression we leave. The Emerald Tablet invites us to ask that question repeatedly. What atmosphere enters a room when you arrive? Do people leave your presence feeling lighter or heavier? Do your words create clarity or confusion? Do your habits quietly encourage those around you toward courage or toward fear? These are not merely moral questions. They are questions of vibration. The Hermetic masters understood that character itself radiates, not through mystical spectacle, through consistency. The consistently honest person creates trust long before anyone consciously explains why. The consistently peaceful person calms conversations without trying. The consistently disciplined individual inspires effort simply through example. Over time, who we are becomes more influential than anything we attempt to say. This explains an interesting paradox found throughout history. The individuals who most changed the world often spent surprisingly little energy trying to change the world directly. Instead, they transformed themselves. Socrates never wrote a book, yet his conversations reshaped Western philosophy. The Buddha possessed no empire, yet the quality of his understanding continues influencing millions more than 2,000 years after his death. Countless inventors, artists, scientists, and reformers began not by asking, "How do I change humanity?" They asked, "What is true? What is beautiful? What is worth dedicating my life to?" The influence followed naturally. The Hermetic philosophers regarded this as one of the highest expressions of vibration. Authenticity carries extraordinary power because it does not struggle to persuade. It simply exists. A candle does not argue with darkness. It shines. The darkness responds. Perhaps nowhere is this principle more evident than in the lives of those who remain calm during moments of crisis. Every family has known such a person. Every community remembers them. While everyone else becomes overwhelmed, one individual quietly begins helping. Their composure spreads. Panic diminishes. Order gradually returns. Nothing supernatural has occurred. One person's inner stability has simply become contagious. The Hermetic philosophers would recognize this immediately. Higher order naturally organizes lower disorder, not through force, through presence. This is why inner work has always been regarded as service to the world. Many people imagine self-development as a private pursuit. The Hermetic tradition sees something different. Every increase in wisdom improves every relationship touched by that wisdom. Every increase in patience benefits every conversation. Every increase in compassion subtly changes every community in which that compassion is expressed. Transformation, therefore, extends far beyond the individual. It becomes contribution. Perhaps this explains why the Emerald Tablet has never been merely a book about personal enlightenment. Its ultimate concern has always been harmony. Harmony between thought and action. Harmony between knowledge and character. Harmony between the individual and the greater order of existence. When harmony increases, unnecessary struggle decreases, not because life becomes free from challenge, but because our movement begins cooperating with principles already present within reality. The sailor still faces storms, the gardener still experiences winter, the musician still practices for years, yet each has learned something invaluable. Working with reality accomplishes more than endlessly struggling against it. The law of vibration ultimately teaches the same lesson. Life is not static. You are not static. Every moment something is moving. Every thought influences another. Every habit strengthens or weakens tomorrow's character. Every decision contributes to the person you are gradually becoming. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything participates, and once this truth is understood, another remarkable discovery naturally follows. If everything moves, If everything contains within itself the possibility of opposite expressions, if fear can become courage, if despair can become hope, if ignorance can become wisdom, then perhaps reality is not divided into fixed opposites after all. Perhaps opposites are connected by something hidden. The Hermetic philosophers devoted an entire principle to this astonishing idea. They called it the law of polarity. And once it is understood, many of life's greatest contradictions begin to disappear. Chapter 5. The Law of Polarity. If you were to ask a blacksmith from the Middle Ages what separated an ordinary piece of iron from a finely crafted sword, he would probably not begin by describing the metal. He would describe the fire. To the untrained eye, fire appears to destroy. It blackens wood, it melts metal, it consumes everything placed within it. Yet to the blacksmith, fire is not merely destructive, it is transformative. Without heat, iron remains rigid and difficult to shape. Only when it enters the furnace does it become flexible enough to become something greater than it was before. What appears from the outside to be destruction is, in reality, preparation. The Hermetic philosophers believed human life follows a remarkably similar pattern. Many of the experiences we instinctively resist are the very experiences capable of transforming us. This does not mean suffering should be romanticized. Pain is real. Loss is real. Grief deserves to be honored, not dismissed with comforting cliches. The Emerald Tablet never asks us to pretend otherwise. Instead, it invites us to examine something hidden within every difficult experience, its opposite. This is the heart of what the Hermetic philosophers called the law of polarity. Everything contains within itself the possibility of its apparent opposite. Day gradually becomes night. Winter slowly becomes spring. Silence gives birth to music. The caterpillar becomes the butterfly. The seed disappears so the tree may appear. Nature offers countless examples of this quiet transformation, yet because they occur so gradually, we rarely stop to appreciate what they reveal. The Hermetic masters saw something extraordinary in these patterns. Opposites are not enemies. They are different expressions of the same underlying reality. Consider temperature. Most people think of hot and cold as completely separate conditions. Yet science tells us something interesting. There is no place where cold begins and heat ends. There is only varying degrees of thermal energy. Lower the temperature gradually enough and warmth becomes coolness. Continue lowering it and coolness becomes cold. The transition is continuous, not absolute. The Hermetic philosophers loved examples like this because they demonstrated an important truth. Many opposites we consider fixed are actually connected by invisible continuums. The same principle appears in light. Darkness is not a separate substance battling against light. Darkness is simply the absence of illumination. Increase the light even slightly, and darkness begins retreating. Again, the two are connected, not isolated. Now consider courage and fear. Most people imagine courageous individuals as those who no longer experience fear. History suggests otherwise. The greatest acts of courage have almost always been performed by people who felt fear intensely, yet refused to let it determine their actions. Remove fear completely, and courage loses its meaning. Courage is not the opposite of fear. It is fear transformed. This subtle distinction changes everything. If courage can emerge from fear, perhaps patience can emerge from frustration. Perhaps compassion can emerge from suffering. Perhaps wisdom can emerge from failure. The Hermetic philosophers believed precisely this. To them, transformation did not require escaping one side of reality. It required understanding how one quality gradually becomes another. This explains why the alchemists spent so much time contemplating symbols rather than merely conducting experiments. Lead represented far more than metal. It represented heaviness, ignorance, confusion, the unconscious life. Gold represented clarity, understanding, integration, awakened consciousness. The goal was never to destroy the lead, it was to refine it. Just as ore must pass through fire before becoming pure metal, the human spirit often passes through difficulty before revealing its deeper strength. Imagine a sculptor standing before an enormous block of marble. To everyone else, the stone appears ordinary, heavy, solid, featureless. The sculptor sees something completely different. Hidden inside the stone already exists the finished figure. The work consists not of creating it from nothing, but of removing everything that does not belong. Michelangelo is often credited with expressing this beautifully when speaking of sculpture. Whether every version of the quotation attributed to him is historically exact matters less than the enduring insight it conveys. The masterpiece is not forced into existence. It is revealed through careful removal. The Hermetic philosophers believed human transformation follows the same pattern. Growth often consists less of adding something new than of releasing what has always obscured what was already present. Fear covers courage, pride covers humility, noise covers wisdom, attachment covers freedom. The work is not endless accumulation, it is careful refinement. Perhaps this explains one of the greatest paradoxes in human life. Many people spend years searching for happiness, while simultaneously avoiding every experience capable of producing genuine maturity. We want confidence without uncertainty, strength without resistance, patience without waiting, forgiveness without being hurt. Yet the universe rarely teaches in this way. The mountain path becomes steep before revealing the summit. The deepest roots often develop during seasons when nothing appears to be growing above the surface. The Hermetic philosophers did not celebrate hardship for its own sake. They celebrated what hardship made possible. A seed buried beneath the earth would appear, to an uninformed observer, to have disappeared. Darkness surrounds it. Pressure surrounds it. Moisture begins dissolving the protective shell that once kept it intact. If the seed possessed human awareness, it might believe its world was ending. In truth, its life is only beginning. The shell must break. What once protected growth eventually prevents it. Many of the identities we cling to throughout life function in much the same way. The beliefs that once kept us emotionally safe eventually become limitations. The habits that once protected us from disappointment slowly imprison possibility. The stories we learned in childhood continue directing adulthood long after they have ceased serving us. Transformation therefore feels uncomfortable because something familiar is being released. The Hermetic masters understood this. They did not mistake discomfort for failure. Often they regarded it as evidence that genuine change had already begun. The caterpillar does not negotiate with the cocoon. The river does not argue with the mountain it gradually shapes. Nature transforms through process. So do we. This realization invites a remarkable question. The next time you encounter frustration, what if the experience is not merely opposing you? What if it is attempting to reveal the quality waiting on the opposite side of it? That question has the power to change the way an entire life is lived. Because once opposites are understood as connected rather than divided, every challenge begins containing the possibility of its own transformation. And that possibility is where the true work of the alchemist begins. There is an ancient story, preserved in different forms across cultures, about a young apprentice who approached an old alchemist after years of studying books. "I understand the symbols," the apprentice said confidently. "I know the names of the metals. I have memorized every stage of the great work. Tell me what remains for me to learn." The old man smiled but said nothing. Instead, he handed the apprentice a lump of raw iron and pointed toward the furnace. The apprentice worked through the day, He heated the iron, hammered it, folded it, cooled it. He repeated the process again and again until exhaustion overtook him. When evening came, he proudly presented the finished blade. The alchemist examined it carefully before asking a single question. "Tell me," he said, "which changed more today, the iron or the man who shaped it?" The apprentice stood silent. For the first time, he understood that every strike of the hammer had been shaping two things simultaneously, the metal and himself. Whether this story happened exactly as it has been told matters very little. Like many teachings preserved through the centuries, its purpose is not to record history, but to illuminate a principle. The Hermetic philosophers believed that every challenge presents two opportunities at once. The first is obvious: to solve the external problem standing before us. The second is quieter: to become the kind of person capable of solving it wisely. Most people devote almost all of their energy to the first. The Hermetic masters devoted equal attention to the second. This explains something that puzzles many people throughout life. Why do two individuals experience nearly identical hardships, yet emerge as completely different human beings? History offers countless examples. Two soldiers return home from the same battlefield. One spends the remainder of life imprisoned by bitterness. The other dedicates themselves to preventing future suffering. Two entrepreneurs lose everything. One becomes cynical, convinced that trust is impossible. The other quietly begins again, carrying with them the lessons their first success could never have taught. The event itself does not fully determine the outcome. The inner response completes the story. This is why the law of polarity should never be confused with simple optimism. The Hermetic philosophers were not asking people to ignore pain by pretending every difficulty is secretly pleasant. They understood grief too well for such shallow thinking. Loss remains loss. Failure remains failure. The death of someone deeply loved cannot be erased by philosophical language. To suggest otherwise would diminish the reality of human experience. Instead, the law of polarity asks something far more compassionate. Can even the darkest experience contain the possibility of awakening something that could never have appeared without it? This is a profoundly different question. It does not deny suffering. It searches for meaning within suffering. The distinction is important. Imagine walking through an old forest after a powerful storm. Massive branches lie scattered across the ground. Some ancient trees have fallen entirely, their roots exposed to the open air. At first glance, the storm appears to have accomplished nothing except destruction. Yet return to the same forest a year later. Sunlight now reaches places that had remained in shadow for decades. New plants begin growing where no life previously flourished. Seeds buried beneath the earth finally receive the light they required. Birds build nests inside hollow trunks left by fallen giants. The forest has not escaped destruction. It has transformed through it. Nature possesses an extraordinary ability to renew itself. The Hermetic philosophers believed the human spirit shares this same capacity, not automatically, not effortlessly, but potentially. The storm does not guarantee new growth. It creates the conditions in which new growth becomes possible. The choice remains ours. This understanding changes the way we remember our own lives. Think of someone you admire deeply. Perhaps they possess unusual patience, quiet confidence, compassion that seems almost limitless, wisdom that calms everyone around them. Now ask yourself another question. Do you imagine they acquired these qualities while everything was easy? Rarely. More often than not, those qualities were forged through experiences they never would have chosen. Illness, failure, loneliness, responsibility, disappointment. Life itself became the furnace. Character became the gold. This is why the Hermetic philosophers often described existence as a school rather than a battlefield. A battlefield teaches survival, a school teaches understanding. When viewed as a battlefield, every obstacle appears to be an enemy. When viewed as a school, every obstacle asks a question. What is this trying to teach? Where is the opportunity hidden inside this difficulty? What quality must awaken within me before I can move beyond this point? Notice how different these questions feel. They do not weaken us. They strengthen our attention. Instead of becoming trapped inside the emotion of the moment, they gently lift our awareness toward the possibility waiting beyond it. The Hermetic masters believed this shift in perception marked the beginning of genuine freedom. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because meaning gradually replaced helplessness. Meaning possesses extraordinary power. A traveler carrying heavy supplies across a mountain may complain endlessly until they discover those supplies contain food that will save an entire village. The weight has not changed. The meaning has. Immediately the burden becomes purpose. Human beings have always possessed an astonishing capacity to endure difficulty when they understand why it matters. The law of polarity continually invites us to search for that deeper why. Not because every answer appears immediately. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes decades, occasionally an entire lifetime. Yet the search itself transforms us. For the person who sincerely seeks understanding is already becoming different from the one who merely resists experience. Perhaps this explains why the greatest teachers throughout history rarely offered immediate solutions. Instead, they asked better questions, questions that remained alive within the student long after the conversation ended. The Emerald Tablet does the same. It refuses to remove mystery from life. Instead, it reveals that mystery itself may be one of our greatest teachers. And as we continue deeper into its wisdom, another extraordinary pattern begins to emerge. Nothing in nature remains fixed at one extreme forever. The tide that rises eventually falls. The night that deepens eventually gives way to dawn. The heart that contracts must eventually expand again. Life itself moves in cycles.